Hi, welcome to my channel. For today's video, I'm going to be recommending just some more emotional and heartbreaking books. So a while back, I did a video on just some of the most heartbreaking books that I have ever read, and so far that's like my best performing video that I've done, and I love reading those type of books, so I wanted to share some more of my favorites. So this is basically a part 2 to that video. I'll link the first video below so you can watch that if you're looking for more. But yeah, like I said, I love heartbreaking books. I love to have my heart broken and cry during books, only if I'm prepared for it. But I just really love reading sad books. I feel like those are the ones that are always the most impactful and just stick with me the most. So I'm always looking for books like this. I'm not always reading them. I have to be prepared to read an emotional book, but when I am prepared, I just love reading them. But yeah, I'm really excited to share these books today because again, they're just some of my favorite books and some of the best books I've read. So the first book that I'm going to recommend is the one that I read most recently out of all of these, and I loved it so much. It seriously became one of my favorite books of all time. I'd probably rank it as like my second favorite book that I've ever read, but that book is Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. So I did a whole review on this book, which I will also put a link to because I had so much to say about it because I just loved this book so much. It's so incredibly heartbreaking, but it's also such a beautiful story. And it basically follows this woman named Kenna, and she was just in prison for the last 5 years, and she's just getting out, and she has a daughter who she's never met. So basically she's trying to connect with her daughter, but the people that were in her life before and that are in her daughter's life are kind of shutting her out and don't really want anything to do with her. And it's just a really sad story. It's incredibly heartbreaking just seeing everything she goes through as like a mother trying to, you know, get to her daughter and get to know her, but then also just seeing kind of like her past because you find out like why she was in prison and like what happened. And it's just such a sad book, but so amazing. It's so just amazingly written, and I just love it so much. And if you haven't read this one, I highly recommend it. It's just one of the best books I have ever read. So the next book I'm going to talk about is another one of my favorite authors, and that's Taylor Jenkins Reid, and the book is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. So I feel like this book is obviously very popular, I think for good reason. I think it's an incredible book. It's so well written, and I just really love it a lot. I think a big part of why I love this book so much is because of the writing, like just the way like I felt when I was reading it. Like it just feels like such a real story. But if you don't know anything about this book, it basically follows this woman who is interviewing this actress. Her name is Evelyn Hugo, and she's already like older, but she was very popular back in like the 60s, I'm pretty sure. And basically she's kind of telling her whole story. She has had 7 husbands throughout her life, so she is telling her entire story to this reporter, and then through that you just kind of see Evelyn's story, and she has a really heartbreaking story too. There was just stuff that happened in this book that I didn't know was going to be a part of it, and it just made it really great, but I just didn't like realize what this book was all about before I read it. I feel like it's a book that a lot of people could like because I read a lot of romance obviously, but this book really isn't a romance because there's just a lot more to it than that. Like the romance is kind of a big part of it, but you also just see like a lot of like other types of relationships, like just like the friendships and just a lot of other things that go on. And so obviously with all that, there's a lot of heartbreak that comes, mostly like in Evelyn's life, and you just see a lot of her story, and her story is just really heartbreaking, and just like seeing the things that she went through. And she's really not like a perfect character, like she's pretty flawed, but she's just like gone through so much, and you just kind of like see a lot of that, and it's just a really sad story. I obviously don't want to give anything away, but there's just a lot of like heartbreaking things that happen. And like I said, I know it's super popular, but if you haven't read it yet, I definitely recommend it. So the next book I want to talk about is one that I have talked about before a couple of times, and that's Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan. So this book basically follows this woman named Bree who meets this guy named Archer, and he is kind of like an outcast like in his town. No one really speaks to him, but she moves to this small town and like that's where he lives, and she decides to befriend him because no one else really talks to him. And basically they become really good friends and eventually fall for each other, but both of them have just some of the most tragic pasts that I've ever read in a book, and you slowly kind of see like what happened, and it's just really heartbreaking to read that. And then just more stuff kind of goes on later on, and there's one part specifically where I just cried so much, and it's just a really heartbreaking book, but it's just another one that's really just well done, and I just really love the storyline of it. The next book again is another very popular book, but that's Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. And so this book is basically a second chance romance. It's told in like the then and now format, so you get a lot of flashbacks like every other chapter. And so the 2 main characters, they met when they were like really young, and then they became really good friends. They eventually like started to fall for each other and ended up in a relationship, and then something happened and they haven't seen each other in like I think 11 years, and then they see each other for the first time, and they're obviously like older now, they're in their late 20s, and there's just a lot of like feelings still between them, and you just kind of see like what happens between them now as adults, and then you see kind of what happened in the past and like what broke them apart. And this book just had like such an incredibly heartbreaking story for the main character. The whole time you're kind of like wondering what happened, and then you find out, and it's a really sad story. I cried so much. But yeah, I really love this book. It was like one of the first few books I read when I got back into reading, and it's just an incredible book. It's really good. I highly recommend it. Again, I know it's super popular, but if you haven't read it yet, please read it. It's really good. The next book I'm going to recommend is another Taylor Jenkins Reid book, and that's One True Loves. So this one is actually my favorite of all of her books. She has 7 books out, and I've read 6 of them, but this one's my favorite. It's just so good. It's an amazing story. And so basically in this book, the main character, she lives in this small town, and her high school sweetheart, they decide to leave. They want to go and like travel the world, and they eventually get married, and she is like a writer, I'm pretty sure, and he is like works on documentaries, like nature documentaries. And so basically he gets an assignment on the week of their 1-year wedding anniversary, and he has to leave for that week, and then he gets in a helicopter crash and he goes missing, and so he's presumed dead, and she obviously is so heartbroken and starts grieving over him, and eventually she kind of moves on from that and she falls for someone else. She gets engaged. She's kind of finally feeling happy in her life, and then she gets a phone call one night, and it's her husband, and he's calling to tell her that he's still alive and that he's coming home. And so I feel like I said a lot of the storyline, but I promise all of that is like on the back of the book. It's not any spoilers or anything. But this story is so good. I loved it so much. I feel like I say that about all of these books, but I really love this one. It had a really great message, and it was just a really beautiful story. And it was just so heartbreaking, like reading all of her grief. Like she goes through so much, and she's just like grieving over her husband, and that was like such a heartbreaking thing to read. And then it's just so sad because obviously she finds out that he was alive the whole time, and it's just, there's so much to this story that just makes it so heartbreaking, and I just highly recommend it. Like I said, it's my favorite of Taylor Jenkins Reid's books. I feel like it's so underrated because her other books are, I feel like, the most popular, like Daisy Jones and the Six and The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I think are like her most popular books. But this one is just incredible. I love it so much. They're making it into a movie, and I'm so excited because it's literally one of my favorite books ever. So yeah, I highly recommend it, especially because the movie's coming out soon, so definitely read it before that. So those are all of the heartbreaking book recs that I have for today. All of these books are incredible, and I love them so much. They all definitely made me cry like a lot, but they're just really amazing books, and so I highly recommend all of them. Definitely let me know any of your thoughts. I would love to do another video like this again in the future because, like I said, I really enjoy reading heartbreaking books because I just think they're always the most amazing stories. So yeah, I definitely have some more recs, and I know I have some on my shelf that I haven't even read yet that I know are gonna break my heart. But yeah, that's it for this video. If you liked this and you're new to my channel, I would love it if you would stick around and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.